Good evening and welcome to The Story. I'm Evan Watson in for Blair Best tonight. We begin with a bit of breaking news in my Uncommitted series, looking at serious issues with Oregon's mental health care system. Today, a judge ruled that Oregon Health Authority is in contempt when it comes to criminal defendants waiting in jail, sometimes for weeks at a time before being admitted to the state hospital. That judge's ruling means daily fines will soon start racking up, and it could force major changes to the state's mental health system. It's our big story tonight. This legal challenge over Oregon's treatment of people with mental illness goes back decades to 2002. The Oregon Health Authority has repeatedly failed to admit people in jail in need of mental health care to aid and assist with their own defense to the state hospital within 7 days. Today, a federal judge said she's had enough. The ruling finds Oregon in contempt of court. Judge Adrian Nelson says OHA has failed to do everything in its power to resolve constitutional violations. The state will now be fined $500 per person per day every time someone waits in jail beyond the 7-day maximum after being found in need of mental health treatment. Those fines will begin tomorrow, and there's still a system to be sorted out about how those fines will be used to improve the mental health care system. OHA tells KGW it's reviewing the opinion and evaluating next steps. Disability Rights Oregon, the plaintiffs, says it hopes the sanctions and remedial measures will kickstart real solutions to fix Oregon's broken mental health system. The judge's order references True Blood, a recent and similar contempt ruling in the state of Washington that sparked significant investment in mental health care, which eliminated a backlog of mentally ill people waiting in jail for care. Judge Nelson also affirmed what we've reported in our Uncommitted series here on The Story, that Oregon has consistently relied upon the criminal justice system as the state's default mental and behavioral health system. In other words, a person with serious mental illness has to commit a crime before they can get care in Oregon. More to come on this in the coming days. Now to our other big story tonight. The Oregon Department of Forestry started their annual aerial survey today to check on the state's forests. It's something they've done since 1947. Over the next several months, crews will fly in a grid over the trees to try and spot signs of damage from the air. Here's Sean McKenzie, who leads the project.
We have an observer on either side of the plane, and they look out 2 miles, and they're trained to recognize sort of a confluence of factors. So host species, biogeography, where they are in the state, and what insect species and what tree species might be present, and then visual signatures of a particular death from a particular insect.
And those signatures of death may be tough for you and I to recognize, but the experts can do it from the skies.
You can see that there's the thinning, declining, narrowing crown in these very tall, very skinny, pointy looking trees. And so that's the visual signature we clue in on from the sky to look for balsam woolly adelgid. This is something we see tends to be at higher elevations because it tends to affect, it can affect most of our true firs, but we particularly see this a lot in Abies lasiocarpa, the subalpine fir.
ODF also does on-the-ground research to monitor the health of Oregon's forests. Earlier this week, our team joined them along the east slope of Mount Hood to check out some damage to the forest caused by an insect called the fir engraver. Their telltale signs are visible just under the bark of damaged trees.
Oh my God, we've got a larva. So you can actually see one larva right here. And so as they basically eat the sapwood, so that would be the cambium and the phloem layers of the tree, and then as they work their way across, they form these kind of incisions, which are called their larval galleries.
This combination of air and ground checkups culminate in an annual report. We're getting a look at last year's results when ODF says they found unprecedented damage to trees due to wildfire and insects. This map shows the damage to the forest last year from drought, heat, and other weather damage aside from fire, as well as insects and disease. The darker red spots are more concentrated damage. They recorded 2.26 million acres of new damage in the last year, not related to fires.
With climate change, we've been really noticing that we've had worsening effects of drought and heat, and oftentimes drought and heat are really the stressors that make our trees decline, and a lot of times our beetles are the final thing that finish them off.
McKinsey says the trends in the data show that over the past 5 to 10 years, they've seen significant growth in the amount of forest damaged by insects that move in after drought and heat events. The majority of the trees damaged were pine species, especially ponderosa pine, true firs, and Douglas firs. And the worst hit areas were northeastern Oregon and the eastern foothills of the Cascades, especially the Rogue Valley, where large numbers of Douglas firs have been killed by the flat-headed fir borer, which is not usually lethal. McKinsey says tree mortality can lead to more tree mortality. Dead trees attract more insects, provide fuel for wildfires, and make it harder for new trees to grow. In the past 30 years, annual precipitation has fallen, although 2024 saw more rain than an average year. McKinsey says more rain can help, but it's not necessarily the solution.
It's not just how much rain we got in a particular year, but it's when we got it, in how many events we got it, and then where it fell. Because the moisture stress the trees experience is sort of a combination of how much water's in the soil, and that depends on what kind of soil they have, and then when that rain fell and how hot it's been. So you might have a year where, okay, maybe we're a little below average on rain, but it's been a pretty cool year, and that rain fell throughout the season, so the trees aren't going to be quite as stressed. Where maybe we have a year where we're well above our annual precipitation normals, but that all fell in December through March, and then it became warm and dry at the end of March, and the trees are going to be stressed.
ODF's report says there are no long-term drought-tolerant solutions for most tree species in the Pacific Northwest, and prolonged or repeated droughts often will end up killing those trees, sometimes years later. For more on the drought conditions in the region, let's bring in Chief Meteorologist Matt Zaffino. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Evan. As we just heard, it is a very, very complex thing, drought. And there's really no one definition. It depends on the user, and it depends on the region as well. So we'll go through where we are right now and where we've been, because it can change. Drought is a long-term event, if you will, or a long-term condition that we monitor to give us an indication as to, okay, how are we doing water-wise in the long term. And here's where we are right now. For the Willamette Valley, you can see it's considered moderate drought on the drought index, but it hasn't always been this way for the entire year. And we're surrounded by an area that is simply abnormally dry, which isn't a drought condition at all. Same thing in northeast Oregon, same thing for a good part of western Washington. And where you see no color at all, there's no drought conditions anywhere. Southern Oregon actually did quite well this winter. So how does that compare to where we've been? Well, let's take a look at this a year ago. And you can see that Oregon was pretty much the entire state was in a moderate drought. Same thing for Washington, a few areas in central Washington getting into what we consider severe drought. That was a year ago. Then we go to 6 months ago, much improved because we had a wet fall and we had a wet early winter. We had some dry time in the month of January, but it picked up again in February. So 6 months ago, we were doing a lot better. And 3 months ago, we had no drought in Oregon at all. So you can see how it changes in 3-month increments here. And then currently, this is the map I just showed you, we've got some moderate or abnormally dry conditions in parts of Oregon. So again, it's a long-term conditions that we monitor to give us a read as to how much moisture we have or don't have. And if you look at the numbers on this, at least for Portland, and this is pretty indicative of all of Western Oregon, it's really the last 2 months. And what's today, the 7th? The last 2 months and today's the 6th. The last 2 months and 6 days where we've been dry. April, we only had an inch of rain. That's just 35% of average. May, 1.92 inches of rain. That's just 76% of average. So since April 1st, we're running at about 50% of average. Now, these are not our wettest months of the year, but still, those deficits matter. Better to do it in April and May than, say, in December and January when we get a whole lot more of our precipitation for the entire year. I mean, if you think about it, we get about 80% of our annual precipitation between November and March here in the Northwest. So again, it's been these last 2 months that have sent us into the abnormally dry and moderate drought conditions here in the Northwest and especially west of the Cascades. So let's take a closer look now where we are for the month of June, the early month of June, the first 6 days. And we're running a little bit below average, but that's not a lot in terms of absolute amounts of rain. It's just a quarter of an inch below average. So, we've got time to make this up. However, we are going into the summer months, of course, as you know, and we don't get very much rain at all through June, July, August, and September. This is our dry season. That's why the rain in the other parts of the year matters so much. Evan?
Yeah, so Matt, a drier spring, how does that affect what we might see this summer, wildfires, anything like that?
You want to get a wet spring in terms of wildfire mostly because it will delay the drying out of the forest and hopefully delay the onset of fires. But we've had big fires in wet years. We've had big fires in dry years. We're going to dry out because we're going into our dry season. And the wildfire situation really comes down to two things: when and where we get lightning, and human behavior, which of course is completely unpredictable. Most wildfires now are started by humans as opposed to lightning.
Got it. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Environmentalists are also worried about a new executive order from President Trump aimed at increasing logging in federal forests. As meteorologist Leah Pizzetti with our Environment Northwest team reports, the plan to make that a reality could come down any day now.
Logging history roots run deep in the Northwest. And at this family business.
Fritch Mill was started by my dad and his uncle in 1950, so we've been on the same site for 75 years.
Eric Fritch's mill in Snohomish is one small splinter in this legacy Northwest industry, an industry that through the last few decades has hit its groove, constantly working to find a balance between the economy of logging and protecting our forests.
We should never be logging simply to cut trees. That's not the objective. If there's a need for those trees or a need for working on the forest health, that's what should drive it.
But this industry is now facing big changes nationally.
I'll be signing an executive order freeing up our forests so that we're allowed to take down trees and make a lot of money and then reharvest trees.
President Trump has signed an executive order instructing the Forest Service to develop a 5-year plan to increase timber production in federal forests by 25%. That has many Pacific Northwest industry professionals worried.
The timber executive order was solely, we need to log more, we need to ramp it up quickly, we need to follow the minimum amount of environmental review possible and just get these things moving fast.
The Sierra Club's Leah Brewster focuses on logging and protecting forests. Leah says the federal forests have a treasure of mature trees that are irreplaceable and should be protected. And we should continue to harvest in the same areas.
Areas that have already been logged and regrown more recently and are already in plantations have a much lower impact if they were to be logged again than to log in old growth or a mature growth forest.
The Forest Service says of the 9 million acres of national forests in Washington, only about 18,000 are currently harvested every year. A 25% increase would be about 5,000 more acres logged annually. This proposal also requires rolling back environmental protections on nearly 60% of national forests, which is 112 million acres here in the West. Protections for endangered species and waterways that local leaders have carefully crafted in areas that are logged. The Sierra Club worries protections won't be followed with this new model.
As we move towards a model where the Forest Service is less staffed, there's much less involvement in that process.
While today's logging isn't as big as it was in the 20th century, it's still a big part of the region's framework.
Balancing the need for wood products with the need to manage our forests for future generations is always a struggle and a balancing act.
The Department of Natural Resources Public Lands Commissioner Dave Upthegrove says the state owns 2.1 million acres and half of that is available for harvest. They are currently partnering with the federal government to log some federal land, but he says he will not support President Trump's new executive order.
We can get in and do work on those federal forests that will reduce the risks of wildfire, improve the health of the forest, do restoration work, and have healthier, better managed forests. And that's a good thing, and we're going to jump at those opportunities. But I don't expect we're going to be partnering in clear-cutting our federal forests.
At Fritch Mill, they've put work into making this process more environmentally friendly. Eric points out that loggers and industry workers have become more aware of environmental impacts. At Fritch Mill, they leave no waste. They can create marketable products from every piece of every log. Plus, tools are better now than when the industry first boomed here a century ago.
With better sawing technology, we're getting a lot more usable product out of a given log than we would have from the technology of 100 years ago.
And he says in an era of industrial expansion, wood is a top renewable product for builders.
There's work that needs to be done, and there's a middle ground for this. It's not all one or not all the other. Nobody in my industry wants to go and cut every tree in the forest. That is not the objective.
And as Pacific Northwest leaders wait for this final national plan, there's hope the balance that has been found here will continue. For Environment Northwest, I'm meteorologist Leah Pizzetti.
After the president signed the executive order in March, the Forest Service was told to create the 5-year plan by early May. But the Forest Service says that plan is still not finished. Keep it here. We have some of your thoughts on Portland's largest parking fee hike in the city's history when the story returns. Now let's get to some of your thoughts on our big story last night. Taking a closer look at the largest parking fee hike in Portland's history, taking effect in less than a month on July 1st. The first hour of parking in downtown, for example, will cost $3.60. Just 3 years ago, that price was $2.20. The rising costs are similar in other parts of the city as well. Meter hours will be extended until 10 p.m. And Mayor Wilson hopes the big transportation package in Salem, if it comes, will help by raising the gas tax as well. The reason for the hikes, a $38 million deficit for the city's transportation department, PBOT, which would face sweeping cuts if nothing changes. Mayor Wilson calls the current funding system, quote, fatally flawed. But despite that, there was absolutely a theme in the emails and voicemails that you've sent us since last night.
In my opinion, it's just another reason not to come into downtown Portland.
Scott also chimed, what's wrong with our city leaders? People are moving out of Portland because the cost of living is too high. People aren't coming to visit downtown in part because parking is too expensive. So what is their response? Raise utility rates and parking fees. The lack of awareness is astounding, shaking my head. We also heard from a viewer named Chris who lives in Washington and visits Portland often.
The up and rising parking fees are unjustifiable with all the break-ins and the crime. And in the shut down businesses. I don't understand why they think raising parking fees would bring more people in. It's already hard to park anywhere near a venue. I often have to park several blocks away and walk, and now I have to pay more to do that. It's a sad situation.
Up next on the story, today marks 81 years since the D-Day invasion on the beaches of Normandy. We found a special report in the KGW Vault hearing directly from D-Day veterans describing the historic operation. That's coming up next when the story returns.
Today, the United States and France again rally together to confront such threats. Because we strive for peace, we must prepare for war and hopefully deter it. We must ensure that our children and our grandchildren know what these men did, that they understand.
Today in France, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth led a commemoration ceremony on the 81st anniversary of the D-Day landings in Normandy. The event was held at an American cemetery overlooking Omaha Beach. June 6, 1944 marked a turning point of modern history as the largest group of military forces ever assembled, 160,000 Allied forces, landed on the beaches of western France. 3,000 American soldiers, sailors, and pilots died in just the first 24 hours of the D-Day invasion. Today we ventured into the KGW Vault and found a special report from the 40th anniversary of D-Day back in 1984, hearing from those who stormed the beaches, turning the tide of World War II.
The fleet, the largest armada in history, arrived before dawn. Battleships like the Nevada, run aground at Pearl Harbor, refitted in Bremerton, were assigned to bombard the beach no matter what happened.
Our orders were that we would pull into this designated spot, which we did, drop the anchor, and if we got hit and the ship was going to sink, we were to pull up the anchor and run it aground and just keep firing. So that's a pretty scary thought, you know, because a naval ship, one of its best defenses is maneuverability.
The first on the beach were the combat engineers, there to remove as much of Rommel's handiwork as they could with a few sticks of dynamite under continual fire.
We got off there about an hour and a half before we hit the beach, but it was dark and rough water. And we'll forget that. Crawled on this web rope. Your feet hit the top. You want to let go. By that time the barge was down, the ship was up. Third try, why I just let go and rolled. And another guy caught me, it was already down.
In the first wave at Omaha Beach were the Rangers, assigned to climb the sheer cliffs at Point du Hoc and take out the German howitzers they thought were above.
I looked at that damn thing and I says, oh, Jesus. And they were already firing at us before we even got close to the damn cliff. And you know, it's a hell of a feeling. You're going up there and you're saying, you got it, you know damn well you got to go. And then suckers are up there, bang, 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 right down on top of you. I've got a little old spot across my hand where a German bayonet came at, and he missed. I didn't. Now I'm going to get mad. There was supposed to be howitzers up there. We climbed and there was nothing.
If you'd like to watch the full half-hour special from 1984, commemorating the 40th anniversary of D-Day, we'll be airing it at 8 o'clock tonight over on our streaming and TV app, KGW+. Download the free app now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. Again, that full half-hour special from 1984 airs tonight at 8. That is the end of our show for tonight. Thank you very much for watching. Timbers 360 is coming your way next. Blair is set to be back with you on Monday night. In the meantime, stay cool this weekend and have a great night.